Catelyn Stark sat in the highest tower of Riverrun, the wind rippling through the long auburn strands of her hair. The sky was a mix of half-hearted grays, hinting at a drizzle but holding the rain at bay. From her vantage, she could see the waters that gave the fortress its name. She could almost hear her father's voice, even though he was nowhere near this tower, reminding her of the Tully words. Family, duty, honor? Those had always been her guiding principles, but in the wake of Ned's death, in the middle of a war that engulfed the Seven Kingdoms, she wondered whether they were enough. She could not bring Ned back. She could not undo the horrors that had come to pass. Her beloved daughters were still in King's Landing, hostages to a callous boy-king. Her sons were scattered, Robb leading a war in the north, Bran and Rickon vulnerable in Winterfell. Each day weighed on her, each night a fresh torment of half-slept dreams. She needed an ally, someone who understood the hidden ways of courtly power, someone who could guide her through the labyrinth that had swallowed her husband and threatened to do the same to her children. That was when she thought of Olenna Tyrell. It was not out of fondness that her mind lingered on the matriarch of Highgarden, for they had rarely exchanged words before. Olenna was famed for her sharp wit and her quick tongue, and for weaving the intricate webs that had placed House Tyrell in favor for generations. Yet, in the swirl of southern politics, this woman had managed to keep her family safe, rich, and poised to gain more power. Even with her son, Mace Tyrell, claiming to lead the house, everyone whispered that the true puppet master was the Queen of Thorns. Catelyn had never truly appreciated Olenna's cunning until she looked at the precarious state of her own House Tully, and House Stark now so overshadowed by the iron fist of the Lannisters. For once, Catelyn saw a path that might open if she dared to walk hand in hand with someone as formidable as Olenna. She still served family, duty, and honor. But maybe it was time to weave a net of her own. She did not tell her brother Edmure or her uncle Brynden her plan, partly because she could not fully articulate it. Another part of her worried about betrayal. While she knew she could trust the Blackfish, there was no telling who else might overhear or misconstrue her intentions. War had made traitors of many men. Secrets did not remain secrets for long. Even though the notion of traveling to Highgarden at a time like this sounded like folly, she heard the words echo in her head. For the children. If a trip south could yield a chance to save Sansa and Arya, to secure support for Robb's war, it would be worth the risk. A silent vow formed in her heart. She would see Olenna Tyrell and speak plainly, mother to mother, about the urgency of preventing further tragedy. No more time would be wasted. Catelyn sent out ravens with carefully chosen words, couched in politeness and an offer of alliance. Then, with an escort of loyal Tully and Stark men, she prepared herself for what might come. The journey to Highgarden carried her through lands ravaged by the war's shifting tides. She passed farmsteads empty of life, gardens overgrown as if no one had tended them for months. The fields of the Riverlands had become a battleground, riddled with horrors she would rather not put into words. Each night she tried to rest, but her mind spun with new ways this could all go wrong. She had precious little coin and fewer allies than she cared to admit, but she pressed on. Slowly, as the climate warmed and the architecture softened from the austere fortifications of the north into the more graceful style of the Reach, she realized she was entering Olenna's domain. Highgarden rose in the distance, a fortress more akin to a vast ornate palace than a forbidding castle. The Tyrell rose banners flapped in the breeze, giving color to the stone. Gardens spilled across the outer wards like carpets of blossoms, and the air was scented with roses and mint. Despite the weight in her heart, Catelyn found herself momentarily enchanted. This place was so unlike Winterfell or Riverrun. Here, the land was gentle, the climate mild, and the people seemed, on the surface, untroubled by the war. Yet she knew that illusions could hide entire labyrinths of plotting. The Tyrells, after all, had not ascended to their current status through simple luck. They had dethroned House Gardener centuries ago by aligning with the Targaryens, and though that had been generations past, the cunning was undoubtedly bred in their bones. She was met in the courtyard by a small retinue of house guards. Their captain, a gracious man with a permanent smile, bowed and greeted her as an honored guest. Catelyn sensed the measured hospitality immediately. She was escorted through corridors strewn with flowers, up a winding flight of steps, and into an airy solar with wide windows that overlooked the manor. Seated before her, clad in a gown of muted jade, was Olenna Tyrell. Time had etched lines on her face, yet her eyes burned with an intelligence that no mortal could quench. She was knitting something, her thin hands quick and steady. Catelyn made the customary bows and introductions, but Olenna wasted no time. "Catelyn Stark," the old woman said, hardly looking up from her knitting. "I wondered how long it would take someone from the north to realize that the Lannisters' hold on King's Landing is built on fresh mortar. A single crack and the whole damn thing collapses." "Damn?" Catelyn drew in a breath, struggling to maintain composure. Olenna's directness was disarming. "I've come because I need a friend." She said carefully. "And because you are rumored to be the most formidable woman south of the neck." Olenna's eyes flicked up, calculating. "Friendship, you say?" She let out a short laugh. "I suppose you can say I'm a friend to any who can be a friend to me. But I do so prefer the word, ally, because no one in these cursed kingdoms seems to know how to be a friend nowadays." Catelyn inclined her head. "Then let us speak of alliances." For the next hour, Catelyn revealed as much as her heart dared. The precarious situation in King's Landing, the captivity of her daughters, the uncertain loyalties that surrounded her son, the king in the north. She spoke of the need to force the Lannisters to negotiate, and how crucial it was to have the support of a powerful southern house. Olenna listened, occasionally nodding or narrowing her eyes. Then, just as Catelyn concluded, the old woman set aside her knitting and snapped her fingers. A cup of fragrant tea was brought in, laced with honey and lemon. Olenna sipped it, her silence more ominous than any question. "War," Olenna finally said, tapping a slender finger against her teacup. "We are all in the thick of it. My house has chosen a side, or so my son believes. The Tyrells could have thrown in our lot with the Lannisters for all the advantage that might bring. But I have known Tywin Lannister longer than you, my dear. A man like that pays a steep price for loyalty and then discards you once your use is at an end." She paused, an arched brow lifting. "So, you want a cunning old woman to help you. It's not unheard of. I've done it before." "I don't propose to manipulate you or your house," Catelyn said swiftly. "We would stand with you if you stand with us. The Tullys and the Starks." "Yes, yes, House Tully, House Stark," Olenna interrupted with a flutter of her hand. "No need for lengthy genealogical recitations. I know who you are. What I want to know is, how do I benefit from this?" Catelyn bit her lip. She had asked herself this question many times. If my son topples the Lannisters, or at least forces them to bend, we will need an alliance that can shape the kingdom's future. The Tyrells could help ensure King's Landing falls, or at least seize reason. And in that future, we can ensure the Tyrells a place of lasting influence. I know you hold the South, but the Lannisters are no friends of yours, no matter how many feasts Mace might host for them." Olenna leaned back. "Lasting influence. Indeed, that is something the Tyrells will want. We want to be more than just the wardens of the South. And dear girl, you have something we do not. Moral capital, a certain sense of honor, the old ways. House Tyrell has always flourished with marriage alliances. But in these times, the approach must be more forceful." "Now," Catelyn understood. She nodded. "You speak of shaping the Iron Throne itself." The old woman gave a thin smile. "I speak of new forms of power. The Lannisters will not let go of their regency without a fight, but there is more than one way to topple a kingdom. I might, for instance, poison a king. Hypothetically speaking, of course. And you might gather armies in the north and the Riverlands. Between us, who is to say we cannot place a new ruler on the throne?" "Menetshau." Catelyn felt her heart skip. "My son has no desire to rule the Seven Kingdoms. He wants the North's freedom. But if we dethrone the Lannisters, we must think carefully about who ascends." Olenna's knitting resumed with renewed vigor, the needles clacking as if forging weapons of steel. "Fear not, dear. We have time to plot. You are welcome in Highgarden for as long as you like, though I suspect you'll want to see if your daughters can be brought here somehow. If we can arrange that, all the better. Then, Catelyn bowed her head. "Thank you." Thus began an unlikely alliance, sealed over cups of honeyed tea and the shared knowledge that neither woman could afford to lose. Catelyn had found the mother's love in Olenna's words, albeit a spiky, no-nonsense version of it, and she realized that, for all her cunning, the Queen of Thorns was motivated by the same desire: to see her grandchildren thrive, to preserve House Tyrell. In a world where mothers watched their children ride off to war, that bond might be the strongest magic of all. Catelyn spent the early mornings walking through the gardens, breathing in the perfume of roses that climbed trellises and spilled across the pathways. Highgarden, despite its outward charm, was a bastion of secrets. Nearly every servant was in the employ of one family member or another, and gossip traveled through the halls like a gentle breeze. When Catelyn asked the stable hand how many warhorses the Tyrells kept in the fortress, she learned more from his nervous stammering and darting eyes than from his actual words. The Tyrell might of arms was considerable, as was their wealth. Olenna could potentially finance multiple armies if she chose. It was shortly after breakfast one day that Olenna summoned Catelyn to a private courtyard overshadowed by a fragrant wisteria vine. There, the old woman met her with Margaery Tyrell, a vision of youthful elegance, dressed in a gown of seafoam green. Margaery's courtesy was warm, yet under her sweet exterior, she possessed a spark that reminded Catelyn of a blade just sharpened. She had heard rumors of Margaery's ambition, of the girl's near betrothal to King Joffrey that had soured after Renly Baratheon's death. Now the young Tyrell was free to find another match, and Olenna had her sights set high indeed. When they sat together, Olenna explained in hushed tones that Margaery's position could be vital to forging a new power dynamic. "We Tyrells are known for our lavish feasts and our loyalty to the crown," Olenna said dryly. "But you and I know better than to place trust in that demon spawn on the throne. Margaery could be queen if the right king sits on the throne. The North wants its independence, yes, but imagine if the king in the North recognized Margaery as his queen, should certain events come to pass." "Menmacher." Catelyn's eyes widened. "Robb is already promised to another. He made a vow to the phrase. Breaking it would cost us dearly." Olenna clicked her tongue. "Men break vows every day in this world. Or they die. That alone should not frighten us. But I suppose you are too honorable to consider such things. Very well. Another route, perhaps. But the notion remains. A Tyrell queen is good for everyone." Now, it stunned Catelyn how practical Olenna could be, how quickly she seized on alliances that others would find distasteful. But she understood the logic. A Tyrell queen would anchor the family's position, and if House Stark could be maneuvered to support that claim, the Tyrell grip on the South would be secured. For her part, Catelyn wanted to keep Olenna engaged, so she tactfully steered the conversation to the hostages. "My daughters are in King's Landing. If we are to move forward, I need them safe." And Margaery reached out and placed a hand gently on Catelyn's wrist, her expression empathetic. "I'll do everything in my power to help," she said in a voice that rang with sincerity. "I know what it's like to be a pawn in these games. Lady Sansa, I hear, is of a gentle disposition. She has suffered much." Catelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. Truly." Olenna gave a curt nod. "Emotions aside, we do have some strings to pull in King's Landing. My granddaughter here is still beloved by many of the common folk after her brief engagement to that toad Joffrey. We can dispatch word discreetly, attempt to coax your girls out, or at least arrange their protection. But let me be clear, Catelyn Stark. This is not an act of charity. I do this to ensure your loyalty in the times ahead. Do we have an understanding? Wow. She swallowed her pride. We do. From that moment on, a flurry of secret letters and small coded messages began traveling between Highgarden and King's Landing. Olenna had watchers at the capital, merchants, maids, even minor nobles, who reported on the movements of Cersei and Joffrey. Meanwhile, Catelyn penned instructions to her son Robb, encouraging him to remain vigilant for the right moment to pressure Tywin Lannister. They could not wait forever. War had a way of devouring time. During these anxious days, Catelyn and Olenna spent long hours in the solar or under canopies in the garden, sipping tea, picking at spiced cakes, and exchanging stories of the realm. They dissected every great house, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of the Baratheons, the Martells, the Greyjoys, and of course, the Lannisters. Olenna's memory reached back decades, revealing old wounds, hidden bargains, and grudges that Catelyn had never known existed. Bit by bit, a plan took shape. First, sabotage the Lannister hold on King's Landing by weakening Joffrey's position. Second, ally with whichever southern or eastern houses might be swayed, possibly Dorne or certain Stormlord bannermen. Third, ensure the safety of the Stark girls, for they were too valuable as hostages and could be used as leverage. And finally, present a united front strong enough to either shatter the Iron Throne's power or reshape it. Catelyn found herself alternately horrified and fascinated by Olenna's casual talk of poisonings, bribes, and orchestrated rumors. Even so, she understood that the old woman was simply enumerating the tools available. The realm did not thrive on honor alone. If Ned's downfall had taught her anything, it was that the game in King's Landing had no room for naive morality. Yet, she clung to a spark of her father's principles. She would not stoop to every vile trick. But alliances, negotiations, perhaps even illusions of betrothal, these were weapons she might wield, if it meant keeping her children alive. News arrived one early afternoon in the form of a scruffy messenger boy who had ridden through the night. He brought tidings from King's Landing. Sansa had been seen weeping in court. Joffrey still tormented her. Arya's whereabouts remained unknown. Rumors suggested she had escaped the city. More importantly, the boy relayed that rumors were swirling about Joffrey's legitimacy, or lack thereof. The seeds sown by Stannis Baratheon's letters had not died. This gave Olenna an opening. The old woman's eyes lit up when she heard that gossip about Cersei's incest with her brother Jaime was spreading in brothels and dockside taverns. If the common folk believed Joffrey was not the rightful king, the Lannisters' grip on the throne might loosen. But the next part of the message was more troubling. Tywin Lannister was marching again, possibly to the east, possibly to the west. No one seemed certain. He was gathering men, forging new alliances. There were whispers that he meant to crush Robb Stark or to fight off some new threat from the south. The details were murky. Catelyn felt a surge of dread. Tywin was formidable. Letting him roam unchecked could unravel everything. We need to move swiftly, Olenna said in a crisp tone. We can't let Tywin isolate us. If the old lion sees that we are working together, he'll strike before we gather our strength. Mace will simper at his feasts, of course. My dear son still fancies himself a major player, though I suspect he's content to let me handle the real business. She waved a dismissive hand. Perhaps we can use that to our advantage. Catelyn took a steadying breath. How do we lure Tywin into a trap, or at least hold him at bay? Olenna tapped her cane on the marble floor. We feed him illusions. We lead him to believe the Tyrells remain uncertain, that we might still side with the crown if certain concessions are made. Meanwhile, you will meet with Robb. Convince your son to plan a series of feints that will draw Tywin's armies into vulnerable territory. I've known Tywin to be cunning, but he also carries a certain pride that can be exploited. If he thinks the Tyrell host might join him, he'll be less wary of your northern wolves. Ow. It was a dangerous dance, but Catelyn agreed. A plan was hatched to arrange a secret parley between Robb Stark and representatives from House Tyrell. Not Mace himself. He was too publicly entangled in Lannister politics, but perhaps one of his bannermen. The location would be discreet, somewhere near the border of the Reach and the Riverlands, an old orchard estate once allied with the Tyrells. Catelyn insisted on being present. Olenna agreed, on the condition that Margaery might also attend. The old woman explained that Margaery had a gift for winning hearts, and she wanted her granddaughter to meet the king in the north. Should the prospects for a marriage alliance arise, so be it, though she knew that vow to the phrase was an obstacle. At the very least, seeing Margaery might fan rumors that the Tyrells were not fully committed to the Lannisters. In the weeks that followed, Catelyn made her preparations. She wrote letters to Robb, urging him to trust her, though she kept the details scant in case the ravens were intercepted. Olenna arranged for carriages, escorts, and a clandestine route. It was all highly choreographed, as though they were planning a grand performance. But at every step, Catelyn felt the weight of possibility pressing down on her. If this worked, she might save her daughters and help Robb secure a real chance to win his war. If it failed, the Lannisters would see it as an act of open treason by the Tyrells, and Catelyn would be lucky to escape with her life. Finally, the day arrived. A small caravan set out from Highgarden. Margaery, a handful of trusted guards, and Catelyn Stark, cloaked in gray, traveling under the guise of a minor noble's relative. They kept to side roads, navigating past the fields of grain and vineyards that dotted the Reach. The orchard estate sat on the northern fringe, where the Mander's tributaries wound through dense groves of apple and pear trees. The estate belonged to an elderly lord who held a sworn loyalty to House Tyrell. Rumor had it he was half-deaf and blind in one eye, but he had a cadre of loyal men who patrolled the orchard day and night. When the caravan arrived at dusk, Catelyn was relieved to see no banners on display, no sign that might betray them to prying eyes. They waited through the night in a drafty hall, warmed by a small fire. Margaery was calm and poised, occasionally humming or fiddling with a flower. Her composure helped soothe Catelyn's nerves. As dawn broke, a lookout announced that riders were approaching from the north. Catelyn's pulse quickened. She hurried outside with Margaery at her side, ignoring the chill morning air. The orchard's narrow lanes allowed for only a few riders to pass abreast, so it was a small party that emerged through the gate. Robb Stark, tall and solemn in his boiled leather and fur-trimmed cloak, flanked by a dozen sworn swords. Her heart constricted at the sight of him. It had been too long since she had seen her son. In that moment, she felt every inch the mother who had lost so much, but was determined to preserve what remained. Robb dismounted, eyes brightening when he saw his mother. He pulled her into an embrace, and Catelyn could not stop the tears that sprang forth. She felt the bone-deep relief of a mother who feared for her child every hour. "You've risked much coming here," she whispered. "Ace, have you?" he murmured, before glancing toward Margaery, who stood gracefully to one side. He inclined his head in greeting. "My lady." Margaery curtsied. "Your grace." They moved inside to a private chamber, where Robb's bannermen and Margaery's guards stood watch at a distance, ensuring no eavesdroppers could approach. Over a sparse breakfast of bread, cheese, and watered wine, Catelyn introduced Margaery Tyrell, summarizing their new alliance in hushed tones. Robb listened intently, his features a careful mask. When she explained Olenna's proposal for a coordinated effort to isolate the Lannisters, Robb's brow furrowed, and a spark of interest flared in his eyes. "This could shift the balance," he said quietly. "But the Lannisters have not only their own forces, they have the power of the throne itself. And we still have the phrase to consider. Breaking faith with them would be—" Margaery held up a hand in a gentle motion. "No one here suggests you break faith lightly, Your Grace. Though my grandmother would say vows can be renegotiated, it's your decision. House Tyrell does not desire to spark another feud with a northern house. We want to help you bring down the Lannisters. That is all." Robb studied her. Catelyn could see his wariness. He was young, but the burden of kingship had aged him. "Lady Margaery, if you stand against the Lannisters, you risk everything. Are you certain your family is prepared for that?" Margaery's smile was delicate but firm. "Our roots run deep, Your Grace, deeper than the Lannisters realize. My grandmother believes, as I do, that the realm will suffer under Joffrey's tyranny. If we do nothing, the Lannisters will bleed the Reach dry, then move on to the Riverlands, the north, everywhere. Our alliance might be the only hope to curb their ambitions." Robb nodded. His mother saw the tightness in his jaw. He knew the cost of trust. Catelyn placed a hand on his arm. "My son, I know this is a lot to take in, but Olenna Tyrell has proven her sincerity in more ways than one. She has watchers in King's Landing who can help Sansa, perhaps even find Arya. If we pull our strength together, we might force the Lannisters to a truce or to a final confrontation. Either way, we gain the advantage." Robb's gaze flicked between Catelyn and Margaery. "And what is it you ask of me, specifically?" Margaery answered with quiet confidence. "First, we need to keep our alliance secret until the time is right. My grandmother will feed half-truths to Tywin, ensuring he believes the Tyrells might still side with him for the right price. Meanwhile, you will plan your campaigns carefully, luring him into complacency. When he commits his forces, we will join ours with yours for a decisive blow. We want the Lannisters destroyed, or at the very least forced to submit. If Joffrey meets an unfortunate end, then another may take his place. This realm was not built on one family alone." "Then?" Silence hovered. Catelyn could see the conflict in Robb's eyes. He had grown up believing in honor and oaths, yet the times demanded a cunning that was often at odds with those values. At last, he breathed out, "I will not stain my honor with kinslaying or betray my sworn word to the phrase, but I will work with you to end this war in a way that benefits both our houses. If that means letting you orchestrate certain events in King's Landing, I will not stand in the way. But I draw the line at open dishonor." Margaery inclined her head, acknowledging his terms. "As you wish, Your Grace." Plans and promises were exchanged in that orchard estate, setting the stage for a grand plot that would soon shake the foundations of Westeros. Robb departed before midday, wary of staying in one place for too long. Catelyn watched him ride away, her heart heavy with longing. She prayed that he would stay safe, that this alliance would be worth the risk. When the party from Highgarden also took to the road, heading back south, Margaery confided in Catelyn how hopeful she was that a new dawn might come. "I have faith in you," she said softly, "and in your son. The Lannisters are not invincible." "Then see." They parted ways near a small crossroads inn. Margaery left with her escort to return to Highgarden, while Catelyn traveled with a much smaller retinue, intending to circle back to River Run. She carried messages from Olenna to her uncle and brother, gently preparing them for the idea of a Tyrell alliance. But each mile weighed on her mind, for she knew that as soon as Tywin caught wind of any duplicity from the Tyrells, the lion's claws would come out. She feared for what might happen to Sansa, alone and exposed in King's Landing. Yet she reminded herself that Olenna had watchers, that Margaery's allies might spirit Sansa away at the right moment. Hope and dread walked side by side in her thoughts. At River Run, she found the fortress braced for a siege that had yet to materialize. Her brother Edmure was both relieved and exasperated to see her. "Where have you been, Cat?" he demanded, ushering her inside where they could speak privately. "There are rumors all over the Riverlands. Some say you've been taken by the Lannisters, others say you've gone south to treat with Stannis. You must be careful." "Dan shall." She told him a partial truth, that she had gone to secure an alliance that might save them all. She withheld details of the meeting with Olenna and Margaery, mentioning only that House Tyrell was open to deals that would undermine Lannister power. Edmure was skeptical, but the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, looked intrigued. He had fought in many conflicts. He knew how swiftly fortunes could change. When Catelyn insisted that this alliance could help free her daughters, the Blackfish nodded. "Whatever we can do to help bring them home," he said simply. That was enough for her. Thus, the seeds of alliance began to take root. Messages were exchanged between River Run, Winterfell, where young Bran and Rickon tried to hold on to some semblance of normalcy, and Highgarden. Rumors drifted of Tywin's movements, of little skirmishes in the west, and of King Joffrey's public humiliations of Sansa. The realm quivered under the tension. Everyone waited for the next blow, the next betrayal. Catelyn began to sense that a turning point was near. Something that would either solidify their plans or shatter them before they began. That turning point arrived when word came that Joffrey intended to host a grand tournament in King's Landing, celebrating his victory over Stannis at Blackwater Bay. Though Stannis lived, much of his fleet had been devastated by wildfire. The Lannisters, with support from House Tyrell, had indeed repelled that siege. The fiasco at Blackwater was widely known, though many details were distorted. Tyrion Lannister was rumored to have orchestrated the defense, though Cersei claimed the victory as her own. Margaery Tyrell was apparently in King's Landing, betrothed to Joffrey, if one believed the official announcements. But behind the scenes, Olenna was pulling her strings. It seemed that Margaery had convinced Joffrey to accept her as his queen-to-be, employing all the charm she possessed. If that was true, it meant the Tyrell infiltration was proceeding, though it also put Margaery in an incredibly dangerous position. Catelyn nearly paced a hole into the floor at River Run when she learned from a coded raven that Margaery was about to make a bold move to free Sansa. The plan was to orchestrate an escape during the tournament, staging a small fiasco that would distract the court. In the confusion, Sansa would be whisked away by riders loyal to the Tyrells, or so the letter said. If all went well, by the time the Lannisters realized Sansa was missing, she would be on the road to Highgarden, or even River Run. Catelyn could hardly believe it. She remembered Sansa's wide eyes, her naive dreams of courtly life, and prayed that the girl could survive the horrors she had endured. But as the day of the tournament neared, something gnawed at Catelyn's nerves. She had come to understand that Joffrey's cruelty was matched by his paranoia, often fueled by Cersei's manipulations. Would they truly let their guard down so easily? She wrote to Olenna, cautioning her about the risk. The raven that returned bore a single sentence: "A rose grows best amidst thorns." Whatever it meant, Catelyn had no choice but to trust the Queen of Thorns to handle her own affairs. Then, a thunderbolt of news. During the opening day of the tournament, Joffrey had been poisoned. Accounts varied wildly. Some said it was at the welcoming feast, others during the jousting. The common theme, however, was that Joffrey had collapsed, foaming at the mouth, and died within minutes. Pandemonium erupted in the capital. Cersei was said to have descended into a mad rage, accusing Tyrion Lannister, Sansa Stark, Margaery Tyrell, and half the court of complicity. Sansa had vanished in the chaos, no one knew where. Margaery was supposedly in hysterics, claiming innocence. Tywin had locked down the city, determined to find the culprit, while the High Septon rushed to calm the masses. With Joffrey dead, the Lannisters scrambled to prop up Tommen on the throne, but the city reeled from shock. In the swirl of accusations, the question of who truly orchestrated the poisoning loomed ominously. When Catelyn heard the news, her mind raced to Olenna's earlier hints. A single thread of fate. Had the old woman truly done it? She could hardly blame her if she had. Joffrey was a monster. But the ramifications were terrifying. Once again, a raven came from Highgarden, this time in cryptic phrases. It mentioned that the city is in uproar, but a sweet bird has flown to a better perch. Catelyn's heart leapt. Sweet bird could only mean Sansa Ty. She let out a sob of relief. Her daughter was free. Where exactly she was taken, Catelyn did not know. Perhaps on her way to Highgarden or hidden in a safe house. But the chance that Sansa was out of Joffrey's clutches filled her with renewed hope. Now with Joffrey dead, the realm's balance shifted again. Tywin Lannister scrambled to consolidate power around Tommen. But with the capital in disarray, many houses saw an opportunity to assert independence or to renege on alliances. Stannis hovered at Dragonstone, licking his wounds but still determined to press his claim. Robb's war in the north was ongoing, with the frays proving ever difficult. And in the midst of it all, Olenna Tyrell guided Margaery to remain in King's Landing, publicly mourning her betrothed while quietly fostering new alliances. For the Tyrells, it was a masterful dance of playing both sides. They maintained enough presence in the capital to claim innocence in Joffrey's death, while secret messages proved their loyalty to the Stark cause. It was a brilliant ploy, but how long could it last? Catelyn found her role evolving. She had been Ned's wife, a loyal Stark. But now she was something else. A broker of alliances, a co-conspirator in a dangerous game. Olenna's influence had rubbed off on her, teaching her that a well-chosen lie can serve the cause of truth if wielded properly. She might have cursed herself for resorting to such duplicity, but each time she thought of her daughters, Sansa hopefully safe, Arya missing, she hardened her resolve. Her family needed her to do whatever it took. A fortnight later, another messenger arrived at Riverrun. He bore the Tyrell seal and brought a missive from Margaery Tyrell herself. Catelyn read it behind locked doors. The gist: Sansa was safe in a secluded manor on the outskirts of the Reach. She was shaken, traumatized by the events in King's Landing, but physically unharmed. Margaery was requesting that Catelyn come to Highgarden to reunite with her daughter and to discuss the next phase of their arrangement. The letter hinted that Tywin was preparing to ride out from the capital, possibly to confront the Tyrells if he uncovered evidence of their betrayal. Time was short. They needed to solidify their stance or risk being trampled when Tywin's armies marched south. Catelyn felt torn. She longed to see Sansa, to hold her and comfort her. But returning to Highgarden would mean leaving Riverrun again and risking capture. The war had reached a new phase, and the roads were no safer. Yet, her mother's heart prevailed. She could not let her daughter languish in secrecy while the world shifted. She packed lightly, informed Edmure and the Blackfish, and set out with a small escort once more. This time, her heart bristled with a new sense of purpose. Olenna Tyrell had done what she promised. Sansa was free. If they now needed Catelyn's presence to rally the next moves, so be it. The journey felt shorter than before, perhaps because she rode with a fierce urgency. Or maybe the roads were less patrolled by brigands now, as many had rushed off to the capital in the wake of Joffrey's death. By the time she reached the familiar gates of Highgarden, her heart pounded with anticipation. Guards in Tyrell colors escorted her to a small orchard in the fortress courtyard. There, beneath the shade of a blooming apple tree, she found Sansa, seated on a carved stone bench. Her daughter was dressed in a pale pink gown, her hair plaited neatly. When Sansa looked up and saw her mother, tears welled instantly. The girl stood, trembling, and stumbled toward her. Catelyn caught her in a desperate embrace, tears streaming down her own cheeks. "My sweet girl." "And she felt how thin the girl had become, how frail her shoulders were. Sansa wept into her mother's cloak, as though years of pent-up terror and anguish were finally finding release. Catelyn held her close, wishing she could shield her daughter from all the cruelty she had faced. For a long time, they just stood there, mother and daughter reunited after an endless nightmare. When at last the tears ebbed, Sansa recounted her journey. She told of the horrors of King's Landing, Joffrey's sadistic whims, Cersei's manipulations. She spoke haltingly of Tyrion Lannister's odd kindness, and how she did not know whether to trust him. Then she described the tournament, the gold cloaks crowding around Joffrey, the sudden choke and foam on his lips, how everyone panicked. She had fled at Margaery's urging, slipping out a side gate with the help of men who claimed to be Tyrell retainers. She had traveled by boat part of the way, then by carriage. They had been kind, respectful, offering her decent clothes and food. She felt indebted to House Tyrell, uncertain why they would risk so much for her. Catelyn listened, stroking Sansa's hair, murmuring gentle words. She assured Sansa that Margaery and Olenna had become valuable allies, that they had done this for the sake of unseating the Lannisters and cementing a better realm. Sansa seemed relieved, but overwhelmed. Eventually, Olenna appeared. She fussed over Sansa like a grandmother, offering lemon cakes and honeyed tea. She led them inside, where Margaery was waiting, radiant as ever despite the chaos of the capital. Margaery expressed her delight at seeing mother and daughter reunited. "You are safe here," she told Sansa gently. "No one will harm you in Highgarden." Catelyn's gratitude was boundless, But she knew this sanctuary existed only so long as the Tyrells held the upper hand. "We must speak of what comes next," she said softly, glancing toward Olenna. The old woman nodded, eyes glinting. "Indeed, we must. Tywin Lannister is livid. He wants to hold someone accountable for Joffrey's death. Tyrion is on trial, or so the rumors say, but the cunning imp might yet wriggle free. Meanwhile, King Tommen sits the throne, with Cersei as regent. The realm remains in turmoil. We have an opportunity, but also a danger." She paused, tapping her cane. "Your son, the king in the north, he's still engaged in his battles, yes?" Catelyn nodded. "He's pressing the Lannisters where he can, trying to hold the Riverlands. Now that Joffrey is gone, he hopes to force a truce or even push south if the Tyrells lend their strength." Olenna pursed her lips. "We must move carefully. Tommen is a gentler boy, more malleable. Some of my family see him as a safer alternative. But if we do nothing, Cersei and Tywin will continue ruling, and we'll be back where we started. Margaery's betrothal to Joffrey died with him, so we have no formal tie to the crown. That means we can choose a path that truly benefits us all." "Then Margaery leaned in. "If House Stark and House Tyrell join forces openly, that could ignite a new war front. But if we remain seemingly loyal to the throne while funneling support to Robb Stark, we might gain an advantage. My grandmother suggests a dual strategy. Sabotage the Lannister efforts in the capital, undermine Tywin's authority, while coordinating with Robb to strike at key points. We play the loyal subjects until the right moment to show our teeth." "Then the one." Catelyn agreed in principle, but worried about the cost. "Every day we wait, men die in the field. I want to end this war swiftly if possible. If Robb and the Tyrell forces stand united, we could corner Tywin. But how do we keep the Freys, the Boltons, and the Greyjoys from complicating matters?" Olenna gave a dismissive snort. "Freys are a fickle bunch. Bribes and titles can hold them in check if we must. The Boltons, well, from what I hear, they're a savage lot, but they remain sworn to the Starks for now. The Greyjoys are more wild card, raiding the coasts. Perhaps a well-placed alliance with them or a show of force would keep them at bay. In truth, these are details for your son's war council. We Tyrells will commit gold. In truth, these are A hush fell as they contemplated the enormity of the endeavor. Sansa, pale and exhausted, asked in a small voice, "Does this mean we'll be able to go home? Back to Winterfell?" The question stabbed Catelyn's heart. Winterfell was in disrepair, taken by Theon Greyjoy for a time, then seized by Ramsay Snow. If the rumors were true, the North teetered on the brink of chaos, with flaring rebellions and uncertain loyalties. She could only muster a quiet reassurance. "We will try, sweetling. We'll do everything we can." It was a solemn vow, one she intended to keep, if it meant forging a new realm where the Starks and Tyrells held sway. The days in Highgarden turned into weeks as plans crystallized. Sansa remained hidden in the castle, rarely venturing out except to stroll through the private gardens. She was recognized by only a handful of trusted servants. Olenna's command. Margaery spent hours writing letters to King's Landing, presumably to her brother Loras, to Cersei, even to Tommen. In them, she portrayed herself as a grieving maiden who only sought the good of the realm. Meanwhile, coded dispatches went to Tyrell bannermen, instructing them to prepare for a potential conflict. Catelyn composed her own letters, sending them by ravens that traveled under false seals, ensuring they wouldn't be intercepted by Lannister agents. In these messages, she laid out the broad strokes of the plan for Robb, urging him to prepare for an eventual open alliance with the Tyrells once the moment was ripe. Late one evening, Catelyn was summoned to Olenna's private solar. The old woman was surrounded by piles of parchment and small jars of ink. A single candle illuminated her face, casting shadows that made her features appear sharper. "Sit," Olenna commanded, gesturing to a wooden chair. Catelyn obliged. "I've heard from my granddaughter in King's Landing," Olenna began without preamble. "She remains there to keep up appearances while you and Sansa remain here." It's a dangerous dance, but Marguerite is adept at playing the court. She writes that Cersei is consumed with rage, determined to find Sansa. The fact that the girl has vanished embarrasses her deeply. She also writes that Tywin is convinced the Tyrells had some hand in Joffrey's death, though he lacks proof. He has threatened to call the banners against us if we don't demonstrate loyalty by punishing you and Sansa. Of course, we won't do that. She paused, her gaze weighing on Catelyn. But the time for subterfuge may be ending. If Tywin marches south, we need to be ready to meet him in the field. Catelyn swallowed. She knew what that meant. So, we stand openly with Robb. Olenna gave a curt nod. Yes. And once that happens, there's no turning back. I want your oath, Lady Stark, that when the fighting begins, the Starks and Tullys will not abandon us halfway. I may be an old woman, but I'm not foolish. We must fight as one, or not at all. We'll have to face Tywin's legions, as well as any southern houses that choose to remain loyal to the throne. We may also have to fend off other opportunists. War is a messy business. But if we win, we can shape the realm's future. Do you understand what I'm saying? No. Catelyn felt the gravity of the moment. She thought of Ned, of his unwavering honor, of how the Game of Thrones had consumed him. And she thought of her children. Scattered, each fighting their own battles. She closed her eyes and took a breath. I do, and I promise you, House Stark will see this through. We have lost too much to turn back now. Olenna exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath. Very well. Tomorrow I will send a raven to Mace, instructing him to gather the Tyrell host. Then we coordinate with your son. If all goes as planned, Tywin will have two major fronts to contend with. The North and the Reach. He may be powerful, but he cannot be in two places at once. That's when we strike. A surge of both dread and determination coursed through Catelyn. She had stepped beyond the bounds of being merely a mother safeguarding her children. She was committing herself, and by extension, her entire house, to an ambitious war strategy that might tear the realm apart. But if it meant freeing her daughters, protecting her sons, and dethroning the monstrous Lannister grip, she would do it. In the weeks that followed, Highgarden bustled with preparations for war. Courtyards overflowed with soldiers. Smiths hammered steel day and night, and supply wagons were filled with provisions from the Tyrell stores. Mace Tyrell arrived in a flourish, surrounded by knights and minor lords, all proclaiming loyalty to the Golden Rose. He put on grand displays of generosity, hosting lavish feasts in the name of unity, though it was Olenna who orchestrated the real strategic details behind the scenes. Marguerite remained in King's Landing for a time, until word came that Cersei, in her desperation, planned to have the Tyrell girl arrested for suspicion of regicide. Whether Marguerite feigned ignorance or used cunning illusions, she managed to slip away from the capital just before the Gold Cloaks could seize her. When she arrived at Highgarden, the entire family breathed a sigh of relief. Sansa was kept out of sight, both for her safety and to minimize the risk of rumors. Every day, Catelyn visited her, helping her find small measures of normalcy. They took walks in the garden, read old songs from a musty tome in the Highgarden library, and tried to let Sansa heal from her harrowing time in King's Landing. Though Sansa's nightmares still tormented her, she grew a little stronger each day. Sometimes, Catelyn caught her daughter humming a northern tune under her breath, as if remembering Winterfell in happier days. That gave Catelyn hope. Then came the decisive summons. Robb Stark had maneuvered around Harrenhal, forcing a Lannister retreat, and was waiting near the Blackwater Rush. He sent word for the Tyrells to march east, so they could unite their forces and trap Tywin between them. It was a bold plan, full of risk. If Tywin guessed their intentions, he might avoid the trap. If the Freys decided to betray Robb, disaster could follow. But no better plan had presented itself, and time was running out. Tywin was already on the move, some said heading for the Reach to punish the Tyrells. With both hosts aiming to converge, the stage was set for a grand confrontation that might decide the war. Catelyn prepared to ride with the Tyrell forces, determined to see this through. She left Sansa behind under the protection of trusted Tyrell guards. Olenna insisted that the girl remain safe in Highgarden until the war's outcome was clear. Sansa wept at the thought of her mother leaving again, but she nodded in understanding. "I'll wait for you," Sansa whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, be safe." Catelyn kissed her forehead. "I will, my sweet girl. I will see you again, and we will go home together." They parted at dawn, the Tyrell banners catching the early light. Thousands of soldiers marched in organized columns, infantry, archers, mounted knights, all arrayed in glittering armor. Mace Tyrell rode at the head, relishing his moment of glory. Behind the scenes, Olenna Tyrell traveled in a curtained litter, accompanied by a hand-picked guard. Catelyn rode not far from her, clad in practical riding leathers, adorned with a small direwolf sigil. She felt a deep stirring in her chest, the culmination of all that had led her to this point. She thought of Ned, how he might have reacted to the sight of a Stark forging so close an alliance with a grand southern house. He might have been shocked, but she hoped he would also have understood. She was doing this for their children, for a realm that had suffered under tyranny. The journey east took them through rolling farmland, small villages, and eventually into contested territory. Signs of war dotted the landscape. Burned-out homesteads, stinking battlefields littered with corpses. But the Tyrell host pressed on, following carefully plotted routes. Scouts brought back reports of Lannister outriders prowling the edges of their line. Tension mounted daily. Finally, they reached an agreed-upon rendezvous point near the Mander's easternmost forks, where Robb Stark's forces were said to be encamped. The meeting was fraught with risk. An ambush could ruin everything. Catelyn, Olenna, and a contingent of Tyrell lords rode out carefully, meeting Robb's envoys halfway. When they beheld the Northmen's camp, a ragged cheer rose from the Tyrell ranks. The famed direwolf banners fluttered in the wind, though many were battle-stained. Catelyn's heart soared to see the Starks so strong. She spotted Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, prowling near the edge of camp, an immense and intimidating beast. Robb himself came forward, steel in his eyes. He dismounted and greeted Mace Tyrell with cautious courtesy. "My lord, I trust you understand the magnitude of what we do here." Mace puffed his chest. "We Tyrells do not ride lightly into war, your grace. We are here to put an end to Lannister treachery." "Damnawal." Behind Mace, Olenna cleared her throat, ensuring no one overlooked her presence. She eyed Robb with shrewd approval. Yes, let's get on with it. Where do we make our stand against Tywin?" Robb directed them to a makeshift command tent, where maps spread across a large table. Catelyn followed, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She saw some of Robb's bannermen, the Great John, Roose Bolton, and others. They eyed the Tyrell entourage with mixtures of curiosity and suspicion. Olenna wasted no time in dissecting the map, pointing out which roads Tywin might take and where the terrain favored an ambush. Roose Bolton, cold and calculating, murmured, "If Tywin suspects our union, he'll avoid giving us an open field. He might retreat or try to split our forces. That's why we need to move swiftly," Robb said, tracing a path with his finger. "If we seize the fords along the Blackwater Rush, Tywin will be forced to fight or lose the route to King's Landing. That's where we make our stand." Plans formed in hushed tones, men nodding or grunting in agreement. Mace Tyrell pledged to send his cavalry to secure a flank, while Robb's infantry would dig in near the river crossings. Olenna occasionally interjected with questions or wry comments, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Catelyn said little. Her role was more as a mediator and a symbol of trust between the two houses. She felt a surge of pride watching her son in command, forging alliances, rallying men who had once sneered at the idea of a northern king. When the council concluded, they set about preparing for the confrontation. Scouts reported Tywin's vanguard was only 2 days' march away. If all went according to plan, the combined Stark-Tyrell host would force him into a pitched battle near a bend in the Blackwater Rush, known for its steep banks. Catelyn could sense the tension in every campfire conversation. Soldiers sharpened swords and fletched arrows, aware they might soon face the lion's roar. Word of the open alliance spread, and men whispered that the Wolf and the Rose had joined forces to crush the lion. Some even claimed it was an omen from the old gods that the once lonely north now marched with the flourishing south. Night fell, heavy with anticipation. In the darkness, Catelyn found Olenna sitting near a brazier, her cane resting against a barrel. The old woman beckoned Catelyn to join her. "Tomorrow or the next day, blood will run," Olenna said grimly. "We've done our part. If the gods are kind, we will prevail." Catelyn nodded, the flickering firelight reflecting in her eyes. "I pray for a swift victory to end all this suffering." Olenna regarded her with something like sympathy. "You've learned a lesson about power, haven't you, my dear? You don't win in the Game of Thrones by moral high ground alone. You need cunning. We do what we must to protect those we love." "Yes," Catelyn said softly. "I only hope that, in the end, we can build a better realm out of the ashes." Olenna chuckled, a wry sound. "You remind me of my younger self, determined to preserve something good amidst all this cruelty. Perhaps we shall, if we live long enough to see it." With that, the Queen of Thorns retired to her tent, leaving Catelyn alone under the vast sky. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer to the old gods and the new. For Ned's memory, for her children's futures, for the alliances forged in desperation between House Stark and House Tyrell. Tomorrow, the war might crescendo, and with it, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet in that still moment, she heard only the soft chorus of crickets by the riverbank, reminding her that life went on despite wars and kings. She thought of Sansa, safe for now in Highgarden, surrounded by flowers instead of scorn. She yearned to find Arya, wherever the girl might be, and longed for the day Bran and Rickon would reclaim Winterfell. Above all, she wished for Robb to live through the coming battle, to carve a place for the North that did not break under the Lannisters' boot. So much rested on the fragile threads woven by two women who had dared to challenge the iron grip of the ruling families. Whatever happened next, Catelyn Stark had no regrets. She had done what needed to be done, allying with Olenna Tyrell, two mothers who refused to stand by and let their families be devoured by the wolves of politics. And so she stood there in the darkness, the hush of the night, broken only by the faint rustle of canvas and the distant clank of steel. Tomorrow, swords would clash, and blood would spill. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of hope. In that quiet space, with the stars shining overhead, Catelyn Stark believed that they could win, that they might truly carve out a lasting peace and protect those dearest to them. The mother's heart in her would accept no lesser fate. And so she prayed for strength, holding tight to the fragile promise that together, she and Olenna Tyrell would rule the outcome of this war and usher in a dawn free of the Lannisters' shadow.